Welcome to the Deep Dive. We dig into sources, pull out the key ideas, and hopefully leave you feeling well-informed, maybe even with a few surprises. So today, we're tackling a question you hear quite a bit, actually. What's literature really good for? Does it do anything practical?
Right. Is it just like nice stories, entertainment?
Exactly. Or maybe something vaguely good for the soul. But what if the answer is, well, much, much bigger than that?
It absolutely is. We're diving into a really fascinating book today, Martin Putner's The Power of Literature. Putner's a Harvard professor, a big name in literary criticism, and his argument is pretty bold.
Okay.
He says literature isn't just some optional extra. It's a massive foundational force. It's literally shaped human civilization.
Shaped civilization. How so?
Well, giving birth to huge concepts, things like philosophy, politics, our major religions, even the idea of nations, our whole way of understanding the world, really.
Wow, okay. That is a bold claim.
It is, but he builds this incredible case for it. Really compelling stuff.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack that, to see how he gets there. His approach, I gather, is a bit like Yuval Noah Harari's Sapiens, that kind of huge historical sweep.
Exactly. He looks at 16 key texts spanning, 4,000 years of history?
Yeah, from Homer's epics.
Right, all the way through 1001 Nights, and believe it or not, even Harry Potter.
Seriously. Harry Potter.
Yep. And he shows how each of these, in its own way, triggered massive cultural shifts, influenced empires, gave rise to faiths, even spurred technological changes.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Okay.
So by the end of this, we should have a pretty solid answer to that what's literature for question. A practical one, even.
That's the goal. A confident, maybe surprising answer.
All right, let's start big picture then, this grand sweep. How did literature, and I guess the tech behind it, actually shape civilizations over time? Putner breaks it down into 4 stages.
4 main stages, yeah. But before we even get to the stages, we have to appreciate the absolute foundational power of writing itself. You know the Argentine writer Borges? He had this great line, "Most tools extend our limbs, right? A hammer extends the fist." But writing and books, Borges said, they extend the brain and the spirit.
That's a powerful idea.
It is. And Putner takes it even further. He just flat out says, Earth is a world built by writing.
Wow.
I mean, think about it. Writing is it's a visual system for language. It lets information break free from time and space. Spoken words disappear, right? But written symbols, they can travel anywhere, last for centuries. That's a game changer for humanity.
Totally. Okay, so stage 1, origins of civilization.
Right. Roughly 1800 to 600 BC. This is where you see oral storytelling, which had been around forever, start to merge with these brand new writing systems. That's where literature, as we kind of know it, begins.
And this early writing wasn't easy, was it?
Oh, not at all. Super complex. Think like thousands of unique characters in early Chinese or intricate Mesopotamian cuneiform signs.
No.
Mastering it was a specialized skill.
So only for the few.
Exactly. Priests, scribes, the intellectual elite. And they were the ones who curated what got written down. The earliest stuff, like the great heroic epics, the Hebrew Bible, China's Book of Songs.
And these weren't just stories for entertainment.
No, they were doing heavy lifting, answering the biggest human questions. Where did we come from? How are we supposed to live? And crucially, they legitimized power, political power, religious power.
So crunching the stories meant controlling society, basically.
Pretty much. Control over these foundational literary narratives was a massive source of social force.
Right. But you mentioned something interesting there. Putner points out a kind of fork in the road with writing itself.
He does, yeah. It's fascinating. In Mesopotamia, you have the Sumerians developing cuneiform. That leads directly to, the amazing Babylonian civilization, texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh, stuff that profoundly influenced Western culture later on. But then you look at the Americas, a totally different story. There, Putner argues, the priestly class actually resisted writing. They were worried, it seems, about losing their exclusive control over interpreting sacred knowledge if it got written down.
Wow. So they actively rejected it.
Largely, yes. And Putner flags this as a really critical decision. It had, pretty stark consequences down the line, as we'll see.
Okay, so that leads us into the second stage. After 600 BC, the Axial Age.
Exactly. The Axial Age. That's a term from the philosopher Karl Jaspers. It's this incredible period where you see these major spiritual leaders pop up independently all across the globe. Socrates in Greece, the Buddha in India, Confucius in China, Jesus in Judea.
All figures who fundamentally change human thought.
Absolutely. All championing new ideas about individual consciousness, ethics, the way we should live, and the literature from this period. I mean, Western philosophy, Buddhist scriptures, the Confucian classics, the Bible. Their influence today is just immeasurable.
But here's the really weird thing Pushner points out, right?
Yeah.
Given how important their written texts became, these guys, the founders, they didn't actually write them down themselves.
Isn't that wild? It's totally counterintuitive. But yeah, Putner makes a huge point of this. These key thinkers, despite being literate, intentionally avoided writing their own teachings.
Why, though? Was it that fear of corruption you mentioned, like the words losing their power on the page?
That seems to be a big part of it. For the Buddha, his teachings were passed down orally. It was only after he died that his disciples compiled them, often starting with, "Thus have I heard," to signal it was reported speech. They seemed genuinely worried that writing could distort sacred words, which is interesting compared to, say, the Brahmin tradition in India, which relied purely on meticulous oral transmission for centuries.
Socrates.
Socrates was even more explicit. He actively argued against writing. He thought it made people intellectually lazy, relying on external symbols instead of internal memory and real understanding. So everything we know of Socrates comes from his students, like Plato, writing dialogues about him.
Huh. And Confucius and Jesus.
Similar patterns. Confucius saw his role as transmitting and reviving older classics, not creating new written works. He said, transmit, but not create. The Analects, his key text, was compiled by followers after his death. And with Jesus, his disciples write the Gospels, but they saw themselves as supplementing the Hebrew Bible, fulfilling prophecies, not replacing it with a new book directly authored by Jesus.
So this teacher literature, as Putner calls it, it's often fragmented, compiled by others, but that very openness and accessibility made it incredibly powerful.
Exactly. That form, maybe because it wasn't a single fixed authored text, proved uniquely effective at changing minds and shifting the course of history. It invited interpretation, discussion.
Which naturally makes you wonder what happened next when authors did start writing more directly. That's stage 3.
Yes, the rise of independent authors. After the Axial Age, writing becomes more widespread, less confined to just religious or state functions, and this eventually leads to new forms, especially the novel.
And the first big one was?
The Tale of Genji. Around 1000 AD. Written by Murasaki Shikibu, a lady in the Japanese imperial court. It's incredible, 1,000 pages long.
1,000 pages. Back then.
Yeah. And probably written for just one reader initially, the Empress. Paper was insanely expensive in Japan at the time. Owning a full handwritten copy was the ultimate luxury. There's a quote from another noblewoman saying she wouldn't trade her copy even to be Empress.
Wow. So amazing achievements, but still pretty limited reach.
Definitely. These works needed a bigger platform to really change the world on a mass scale.
Which brings us perfectly to stage 4. Mass literature. Paper and printing press time.
The big revolution, exactly. This is where books become, commodities, mass-produced items, and it changes everything.
Driven by technology, but also by the ideas those technologies carried.
It's totally intertwined. First, paper. The technique comes from China, spreads to the Arab world, and boom, a double revolution. Yeah. First, for sacred texts. There was some initial hesitation, like, is paper good enough for the Quran? But it was so much cheaper and easier to write on than parchment, it eventually won out. Changed how scriptures spread.
Okay, and the second part.
Secular stuff.
Yeah.
Cheaper writing materials meant popular works could flourish. Think 1001 Nights, the Arabian Nights. Suddenly, stories like that could circulate much more widely. It's telling that our word ream for a stack of paper comes directly from the Arabic word.
Huh, I never knew that. But the Arabs didn't adopt printing from China, did they?
No, largely because their flowing cursive script just didn't work well with movable type blocks. That needed an alphabetic system.
Enter Gutenberg.
Enter Gutenberg. Movable type had been invented in China centuries earlier by Bi Sheng, but it was Gutenberg in Germany who made it truly practical for European languages with just a few dozen letters, not thousands of characters.
And his masterpiece, the Bible.
The printed Bible. Absolutely pivotal. Then you get Martin Luther and the Reformation. The printing press, turbocharges his ideas, gets Bibles translated and into the hands of ordinary people.
Letting them interpret it for themselves, bypassing the church hierarchy.
Exactly, a fundamental shift in thinking. It arguably propels Europe out of the Middle Ages and into modernity. It shows how literature and the tech that carries it are constantly pushing against each other, reshaping civilization.
And Putner uses a really dramatic historical moment to drive this home, right? The story of Pizarro conquering the Incas.
Yeah, it's a brutal but powerful illustration. Less than 70 years after Gutenberg prints his Bible, Francisco Pizarro shows up in South America with fewer than 200 soldiers, and he takes down the massive Inca Empire.
Incredible odds.
And when Pizarro meets the Inca Emperor Atahualpa, the Spanish have their horses, their steel weapons, but they also bring out this other weapon,
The Bible.
a printed Bible. Putner paints it as this culmination of Western history. Ideas from Jesus, recorded using scripts from Mesopotamia and Greece, bound using Roman techniques onto Chinese paper, printed with German technology.
A symbol of a whole civilizational package.
Absolutely. Pizarro hands it to Atahualpa, says it holds the word of God and the authority of the Spanish king, demands he submit.
And Atahualpa.
He's never seen a book, doesn't know what it is. He struggles to open it, apparently. Then he holds it up to his ear, trying to listen to it because the translator mentioned God's word.
Oh, wow.
He hears nothing, gets confused or maybe frustrated, and throws it on the ground.
Big mistake.
Huge. The Spanish priests immediately cry, "Blasphemy!" Pizarro gives the signal, and the attack begins.
And the Incas, who had this complex civilization but no writing.
Exactly. They were one of those cultures that had, for whatever reason, resisted literature. To the Spanish, this inability to understand the book, this object, meant they were barbarians. No real dialogue possible. Their perceived literary backwardness became part of the justification for conquest.
Putner's summary is pretty stark, isn't it?
Yeah. Backwardness leads to beatings. And it applies not just to military tech, but to these informational and literary frameworks too.
That is a chilling story. But okay, someone listening might still think, hang on, wasn't that really about the technology? The printing press, the paper, the guns, rather than the literature itself. How does Putner tackle that? Is it just that tech enables literature, or is literature the actual engine?
That's a great question, and it's central to his argument. Putner says, look, the technologies printing, publishing, they aren't separate from literature. They're deeply intertwined. They shape each other constantly.
Okay.
But crucially, the technology wouldn't even be developed or applied in these ways without the underlying need or desire generated by the literary works themselves. There's no printing press without something people desperately want to print and read, like the Bible.
So the tech is the vehicle, but the ideas in the literature are the fuel.
Exactly. Technology makes the change visible, tangible, but the real engine, Putner argues, is the internal human drive, our thinking, our spirit, our imagination. And ever since writing appeared, literature has been the primary fuel for that engine.
Right.
And if you're still a bit skeptical, he offers some really specific moments. He calls them decisive, iconic moments where you can see literature directly stirring an individual's spirit and, through them, changing the world. More micro-level examples.
Okay, let's hear them. The first one goes way back, right? Alexander the Great.
Way back, we're talking 2,300 years ago, Alexander undeniably changed the world. 13 years, unites Greece, conquers everything from there to Egypt, takes down Persia, pushes all the way to India. Huge military impact, huge cultural impact still felt today.
So the question is why? Why did he push so relentlessly, especially into Asia, when previous Greeks were mostly focused on their own city-states?
The answer, according to Putner and historical accounts, lies in a book, Homer's Iliad.
The epic poem about the Trojan War.
That's the one. Apparently, every single night on his campaigns, Alexander slept with 3 things nearby. A dagger, a special box he captured from the defeated Persian king Darius III, and inside that box, his most treasured possession.
Homer's Iliad.
A copy of Homer's Iliad. This poem wasn't just inspiration, it was his blueprint, his motivation. He wanted to reenact the Iliad in his own life.
He didn't just admire Achilles, the hero of the Iliad.
He saw himself as Achilles, the ultimate warrior. He consciously modeled his actions on Achilles.
Wow. So literature literally shaped his self-perception and his ambition. Can we see specific examples?
Oh, yeah. Achilles, in the poem, famously drags the body of the Trojan hero Hector behind his chariot after killing him. It's brutal. Alexander does the same kind of thing, sacks cities that defy him, drags the bodies of enemy commanders.
Good grief.
He kept that box he took from Darius as a constant reminder. Darius was his Hector. He even made militarily questionable decisions, like relentlessly pursuing Darius across Persia, hoping for that one-on-one heroic duel, just like in the Iliad.
He was trying to live out the plot.
Pretty much. And when Darius was eventually killed by his own men, Alexander was furious. He hunted down the killers and punished them severely. It wasn't the heroic ending he'd envisioned from the book.
So a classical text directly shaped a conqueror's life, and through him, the map of the ancient world.
Absolutely. A direct line from literature to world-altering action.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, let's jump forward, a long way forward. The second story is much more recent, from the space age.
Yeah, just over 50 years ago, late 1968, Apollo 8. The mission was basically a scouting trip for the moon landing.
First humans to orbit the moon, right?
First humans to leave Earth's orbit, first to see the Earth as a whole planet from deep space, first to see the far side of the moon. Monumental stuff.
And as they're out there, seeing these views no human had ever seen.
The cameras they had, they just couldn't capture the feeling, the scale, the meaning of it all. So ground control in Houston basically says, forget the cameras for a minute, just tell us what you're seeing, describe it.
And these guys were test pilots, engineers.
Right. Fighter pilots, scientists, not exactly trained poets. And apparently they hesitated a bit at first.
I would too.
But then they started finding the words, describing the moonscape, the lunar sunrise, the Earth hanging in the blackness. And they moved beyond just description into something more profound.
Like what?
Phrases like, it's a vast, lonely, awe-inspiring existence, or contrasting it with an extension of nothingness. Real philosophical, almost literary language bubbling up.
Maybe literature isn't just something we read, but something deep inside us that surfaces in these moments.
That's a great way to put it. Maybe it taps into something inherent. It's interesting, Michael Collins, who flew on Apollo 11 later, said future missions should take a poet or a philosopher along, someone who could really articulate the experience.
That makes sense. But the most famous part of that Apollo 8 broadcast was when they read something, wasn't it?
Yes. On Christmas Eve, broadcasting back to Earth, they took turns reading the opening verses of the book of Genesis, the creation story.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
That passage. It was incredibly moving for millions of people listening back on Earth. Hugely powerful moment.
Though it caused some controversy too, right? Separation of church and state issues.
It did. Some atheists protested using religious text on a government mission. But regardless of where you stand on that, Puchner's point is it demonstrated literature's massive social influence.
Out.
For a huge part of the audience, particularly in the West, hearing Genesis read from lunar orbit forged this incredibly powerful link. It connected this cutting-edge scientific achievement humanity reaching for the stars directly back to a foundational religious text, a core part of their cultural understanding.
And that connection helped build public support for the hugely expensive space program.
Arguably, yes. It gave the mission a kind of resonance, a deeper meaning beyond just the technical goals. It tapped into something ancient and powerful in the collective imagination. So Puchner sees this as showing that the boundaries humans explore physically often mirror the boundaries first explored in thought and literature. Literature wasn't just describing space here. In a way, it was part of the drive to go there.
The internal journey fuels the external one.
Exactly. It's a continuous loop. The imaginative world pushes us into the real world, and the real world feeds back into the imagination.
So the answer to what's literature for is, well, it shapes history, it drives exploration, it defines our understanding of ourselves and the universe.
Pretty much. It shaped our past, and it will absolutely continue to shape our future. It's fundamental.
Well, okay. That really reframes things. We've covered so much ground going through Puchner's power of literature. It really does connect the dots across history in a way I hadn't thought about before.
It's a powerful lens, isn't it? Seeing history through these key texts, we saw those macro stages, how literature evolved alongside civilization from those early elite scribes.
Right, through the Axial Age teachers.
The rise of authors in the novel, and then the explosion with paper and printing, the whole world becoming, as he says, a written world.
And then those micro moments, Alexander, fired up by Homer, the Apollo astronauts reaching for Genesis. Literature hitting the individual spirit and changing the world through them.
Yeah. It makes a compelling case that literature and civilization, their fates are just completely bound together. You can't really separate them.
Which makes you think about now, we're obviously in another huge technological shift with the internet, the digital age. How does this framework apply today?
Well, Pushner actually touches on this right at the end, using Harry Potter as a kind of case study.
Ah, yes, Harry Potter made the list.
It did. He sees it as this phenomenon bridging the old world of traditional publishing, massive print runs, global distribution with the new digital world of online fan communities, fan fiction, instant global discussion.
So Gutenberg democratized access to reading books.
And now the internet is democratizing authorship, in a way. What Gutenberg did was shift the main writing tool from just authors to publishers, too, making writing a profession and reading widespread. Today, computers, the web, everyone's potentially an author, instantly global.
But beyond just how it's made and spread, what about the impact of something like Harry Potter, those massive online fan communities?
Exactly. They function almost like new kinds of tribes or nations, Pipner suggests, with their own norms, discussions, influencing wider culture, media, even politics sometimes. It shows the enduring power of narrative, even in this hyper-connected digital form.
So the final thought then, the provocative question Pushner leaves us with, is about the future.
Right. Given all these massive changes, how we write, how we transmit stories, how we read, how we interact around them, how is the very idea of literature going to change?
Could it even move beyond written text entirely?
Could it? What does literature look like in an age of multimedia, AI, virtual reality? We don't know yet. It's an open question. Something for all of us to watch and maybe participate in as the story of civilization keeps unfolding.